The crew of the German Tiger died instantly, even though there wasn't a single penetrating hole in their tank's armor. In 1943, German Tigers and Ferdinands were picking off Soviet vehicles like they were at a shooting range, fearing no punishment. Their armor seemed eternal. But one day, near Kursk, a German gunner saw in his sights not the familiar silhouette of a tank, but a strange, squat casemate with a barrel that looked like a log. A shot, and the 8-ton turret of the Tiger flew 10 meters through the air, stabbing into the ground with its barrel like a grave cross. Power has its price. Blood running from the ears of its own crew and torsion bars snapped by the recoil. We will tell you how this steel beast slayer taught the Germans to fear every bush, how it demolished houses along with snipers in Berlin, and why its shells ignored armor, simply breaking the bones of the tank itself. Get ready. There will be no beautiful maneuvers here. Only the smell of burning, the screech of torn metal, and the triumph of brute force. The screech of metal on metal. This is the most terrifying sound of war. Not the explosion, not the whistle of a mortar shell, not the wheeze of the dying. Most terrifying of all is the scream of a ricochet. A short, high-pitched, mocking howl when a steel slug, into which the crew has put all their hope, grazes the enemy armor and goes off into the sky, leaving only a scratch. In January 1943, this sound became a funeral march for Soviet tank aces. Winter near Leningrad. The area of Maga Station. Peat bogs bound by frost and sparse forests stitched with tracers. Here, Soviet tankers first collided with a reality that the mind refused to accept. 60 tons of dark German engineering. The Tiger. It crawled out of the fog, angular, heavy, disproportionately huge, and crossed out all the tactical manuals of the Red Army. T-34s, the workhorses of the war, darted before it like a pack of wolves before a bear. Distance, 500 meters. Shot. Flash. The ring of impact. And silence. The German tank did not even slow down. Its frontal armor, 100 millimeters thick, swallowed the Soviet 76 millimeter shell without choking. The crews of the T-34s feverishly turned their hand wheels, closing the distance. 300 meters, 200, point-blank shots. The result was the same. Sparks, the scream of a ricochet, and the slow turn of the Tiger's turret. The 88 millimeters of its gun looked straight into the soul of the Soviet gunner. The crack of the German gun's shot was dry, like the sound of a breaking bone. The Soviet tank flared up instantly, turning into a mass grave of red-hot iron and burning diesel. In the staff dugouts, an atmosphere of heavy, leaden powerlessness reigned. The air was blue with tobacco smoke. Officers bent over maps and reports, but in their eyes one could read not tactical cunning, but dull rage. The mathematics of war had stopped adding up. For a long time, it was considered that the caliber of 76 millimeters was the universal answer. But you cannot fool physics. The kinetic energy of the F-34 shell was simply not enough to smash through Krupp cemented steel. We were hitting the enemy with a scalpel when an axe was required. In the dugout of the tank brigade commander, it was cold, yet sweat ran down the faces of those gathered in streams. On the table lay a fragment of armor, a jagged, melted piece of metal brought by scouts from no man's land. "Report!" The colonel's voice sounded hoarse, as if he had torn his vocal cords shouting over the noise of battle. The engineer major sitting opposite nervously rubbed his unshaven cheek. His fingers were black with grease and soot. "3 hits, Comrade Colonel. 3. Distance 250 meters, with sub-caliber rounds. Result? A dent 20 millimeters deep, chipping of the upper layer. The enemy crew did not lose combat effectiveness. Our vehicle was destroyed by return fire. And the KVs? The heavy tanks? The KV-1 is too slow to get into position, and if it does get out there, its gun is the same, 76 millimeters. We are knocking on a locked door while they shoot us through the peephole. The colonel slammed his fist onto the table with a crash. Pencils jumped and rolled across the map. So, we are targets, just moving targets. The Germans have developed a long arm, and we are trying to reach them with a knife. We need a different caliber, said the artilleryman, standing by the entrance quietly. He was smoking a hand-rolled cigarette, inhaling deeply, right down to the filter. We won't pierce them with a needle. We need to stun them, break them. And what do you propose? Dragging core artillery to the front line, snapped the engineer. The crews will be dead a minute after opening fire. The Tiger's optics allow it to see a fly on your nose from a kilometer away. Machine guns will cut down the artillerymen before they can load. That means the gun needs to be hidden behind armor. We don't have armor that can withstand their 88, and there is no chassis for it. If you put a howitzer on a KV, the turret will jam from the weight. The turret ring won't withstand the recoil. The tank will flip over to hell. Silence hung in the dugout. Only the thud of explosions somewhere far away on the front line could be heard. It was not just a technical problem. It was a dead end, a crisis of doctrine. Soviet tank building, proud of its mass production and maneuverability, had run into the steel wall of the enemy's technological superiority. German Cats, Tigers, and soon Panthers were expected, dictated their terms. They could kill from 1,500 meters while remaining invulnerable. The arithmetic of death was simple and cruel. To destroy one Tiger, 5 or even 10 medium tanks had to be sacrificed. It was an exchange that even a huge country could not afford. Men were dying not from errors in command, but because their weapons physically could not harm the enemy. Gunners cried with rage, seeing their shells bounce off the gray sides, leaving only small clouds of sparks. Drivers squeezed every drop out of the engines, trying to flank them, but the German tanks turned on the spot with a speed frightening for their mass. "We need a sledgehammer," the colonel suddenly said, looking at the melted fragment. "No need to penetrate. To hell with penetration. If we can't pierce their hide, we must break their bones." A blow of such force that the light bulbs inside burst, that the weld seams come apart, that the crew turns into jelly from the concussion. The engineer raised his eyes. A cold, calculating light flashed in them. Gun howitzer ML-20, caliber 152 millimeters. "It weighs 7 tons, objected the artilleryman. "The barrel length is almost 5 meters. Where will you put it? On a cart?" "On the KV-1's base. We'll remove the turret, cut the turret ring, weld a casemate right onto the hull. We'll save weight. It will be a self-propelled carriage." "That won't be a tank. That will be a coffin on tracks." "No machine gun, no rotating turret." "It won't be a tank," the colonel cut him off. "It will be an argument, final and irrevocable." That evening, a report went up the chain of command. There was no panic in it, only dry casualty figures and a harsh conclusion. Existing tank and anti-tank guns are ineffective. An urgent, extraordinary solution is required. Time was measured not in days, but in the number of burned crews. The front demanded not just a new weapon, but a monster capable of devouring the German menagerie. Somewhere in the rear, in cold Chelyabinsk, designers did not yet know that they would have to achieve the impossible. But on the front line, amidst the burning and twisted metal, the solution had already matured. The idea was born of desperation, of the smell of burnt flesh and the sound of useless ricochets. The era of light pinpricks was over. The time of heavy direct-fire artillery was coming. A time when the physics of mass and blast waves would become the only law of survival. The order of the State Defense Committee fell onto Joseph Kotin's table in Chelyabinsk like a heavy concrete slab. Tankograd, shrouded in frosty steam and coal dust, received a task that, by all laws of engineering logic, was impossible. The deadline was 24 days, not for concept development, not for creating a mock-up, but to roll a ready-to-fight machine out of the shop. This was not a deadline. It was a sentence, which only death could postpone. In the design bureau of the Kirov plant, there was no panic. There was simply no strength left for it. There was the cold, angry focus of people backed into a corner. The task sounded like a technical oxymoron. Take the 152mm gun howitzer ML-20, a bulky, heavy field artillery piece, and shove it inside a tank. "It won't fit," said the lead engineer dully, looking at the blueprints of the KV-1's chassis. "The breech takes up half the fighting compartment. The barrel recoil upon firing is more than a meter. Where do we put the crew? Sit them on the armor?" Khotin did not look at the blueprint. He looked at the calendar. "Remove the turret. Cut off the ring. Weld the casemate directly to the hull. The center of gravity will shift up. The machine will become unstable. Widen the base. Reinforce the torsion bars. Do what you want, but the gun must stand here. And it must shoot." Work began not with drafting tables and paper. Time for classical design did not exist. Blueprints were drawn with chalk directly on sheets of armor steel lying on the factory floor. Layout men crawled on the metal on their knees, drawing cutting lines, and welders followed right behind them. The air in the shops became dense with blue smoke and the smell of ozone. The electric arc hissed around the clock, burning up oxygen and eyes. People worked in shifts of 18 hours, falling asleep right by the machines on piles of oily rags. The main problem lay in the physics of recoil. The ML-20 was a beast. Upon firing, it threw a shell weighing nearly half a centner with such energy that on the ground the carriage was held by powerful spades digging into the earth. Here, the tank chassis had to absorb all this monstrous energy. If the calculations were wrong, the very first shot would not just tear the gun from its mounts, it would split the hull along the weld seams and turn the transmission into a pile of gears. In the assembly shop, there was a roar that made the concrete floor vibrate. Overhead, cranes dragged the huge barrels of howitzers with a strained howl. The barrel with the muzzle brake weighed tons. To install it into the embrasure of the casemate required the jeweled precision of a crane operator working at the limit of exhaustion. One wrong movement of the lever, and the multi-ton steel pipe would crush the mechanics who were guiding the trunnions into the sockets by hand. "Lift! Lift a little!" shouted the foreman, shouting over the noise of pneumatic hammers. His face was gray with ingrained metal dust. "Stop! Where are you pulling, you bastard? The trunnion is jammed!" The welder hanging on the armor flipped back his mask. His eyes were red and inflamed. "It won't go in, Petrovich. The frame is narrow. We have to cut. Cut it live. There's no time to redo the casting. Cut a chamfer, reinforce with gussets. It'll crack. If it doesn't shoot, they'll shoot us anyway. Cut!" The engineers were achieving the impossible. They were crossbreeding a hedgehog with a snake. The howitzer had separate loading, first the shell, then the casing with the powder charge. This required space for the loader to work. In the cramped casemate, packed with ammunition, every centimeter was worth its weight in gold. They had to change the layout of units on the fly. Fuel tanks were moved, wiring was rerouted, ammo racks were squeezed into any free niches. Ergonomics? No one thought about it. They thought only about how to stuff 20 shells and 20 charges into a steel box so that they wouldn't detonate from a random hit. The tank, which received the index KV-14, later becoming the Su-152, was born ugly. It was not an elegant machine for parades. It was a functional piece of iron, roughly welded, with scars from grinding wheels and drips of metal. The tall casemate made it look like a crypt on tracks, but in this roughness, a primal strength was felt. On the 20th day, an incident occurred in the shop. During the installation of the gun mantlet, a cable snapped. The heavy armor plate crashed down, miraculously missing people, but damaging the breech of the gun. The silence that hung after the crash was more terrifying than the sound of the fall itself. "Replace the gun." Khoten's voice was calm, but steel rang in it. "There are no spare barrel assemblies, Comrade Chief Designer. The next delivery from the artillery plant is only in 3 days. Take it from the proving ground test stand. At night, so that by morning the machine is ready. But that is a violation of testing protocol. We will write protocols after the victory. Execute." The machine was assembled like a construction set, where parts had to be fitted with a sledgehammer and curses. But it came together. On January 24th, 1943, the gates of the assembly shop swung open. Frosty air hit faces, mixing with the heat of cooling metal. The first prototype rolled out into the factory yard. The engine roared, spewing clouds of black exhaust. The tracks clanked on the frozen concrete. Externally, the self-propelled gun looked terrifying. A huge barrel with a slotted muzzle brake stuck out of the front plate like the trunk of a prehistoric beast. It was disproportionate, with the casemate shifted forward, creating the feeling of a bull ready to strike. No aesthetics, only pure, concentrated threat. The chief designer walked up to the machine and put his hand on the cold armor. The vibration of the V2 diesel was transmitted through his glove. The machine was alive. It breathed. But for now, it was just a tractor with a gun. No one knew what would happen when this monster took its first full breath, when a 48-kilogram shell was rammed into the breech and the trigger was pressed. "To the proving ground," Khoten dropped shortly, not taking his hand off the armor. "Load the slugs. We'll check if it can withstand itself." It was already getting dark in Chelyabinsk. Headlights picked out swirls of snow. The column of factory testers moved toward the proving ground. Men were falling off their feet from fatigue, but no one could sleep. Adrenaline burned away sleep. 24 days of hellish labor were compressed into a single point, into the moment of the upcoming shot. No one spoke aloud about the fact that everyone was afraid that the mounts would tear, that the welds would burst, that the crew would go deaf or suffocate from powder gases in the cramped space. Theory was over. The blueprints remained in the shop. Now only physics spoke. And this conversation promised to be loud. On the snow-covered field of the proving ground, where a captured German tank used as a target stood, a new era of war was preparing to be born. An era where armor no longer saves, and caliber is of decisive importance. The driver killed the engine. A ringing silence ensued, which in a few minutes was to be torn apart by thunder capable of shaking the very foundations of tank warfare. The proving ground met the testers with a prickly wind and whiteness that made eyes water. At a distance of 1 kilometer, the silhouette of the target blackened. It was a captured German tank seized near Stalingrad. Its hull had been reinforced with additional armor plates, simulating the frontal projection of the newest heavy vehicles of the Wehrmacht. It stood as a monument to German technological pride, angular, predatory, seeming indestructible even in its motionless silence. Inside the casemate of the self-propelled gun, it was as cramped as a mine shaft. The loader, a stocky guy with the hands of a blacksmith, lifted the shell with a strained grunt. 48 kilograms of steel and explosives. High-explosive fragmentation grenade 530. It was not an elegant armor-piercing needle, but a blunt, cast-iron pig created for destroying concrete fortifications. "Ready!" exhaled the loader, ramming the shell into the breech with a wooden ramrod. The casing with the full propellant charge flew in next. The heavy wedge breech block clanked, cutting off the crew from the outside world. The gunner pressed against the panoramic sight. In the eyepiece, the crosshairs of the sight danced on the turret of the German tank. His hands on the aiming wheels did not shake, but they were wet with tension. Everyone understood. Right now, not just the fate of the machine was being decided, but the fate of the entire tank industry. If the chassis did not withstand the recoil, if the cradle mounts tore, if the hull cracked, a tribunal for sabotage awaited them all. Outside, at the observation post, generals and designers froze. Binoculars were pressed into eye sockets. No one breathed.
Fire!
The command sounded, not loud, but sharp. The self-propelled gun jerked as if hit in the forehead with a sledgehammer. The muzzle brake spewed 2 huge tongues of flame to the sides, raising a snow whirlwind that hid the machine entirely. The sound of the shot hit the eardrums with a heavy, dense wave. It was not the dry crack of a tank gun, but the guttural roar of a howitzer, from which the ground trembled under the feet of the commission. The KV hull settled on its stern. The torsion bars creaked pitifully, taking on the monstrous recoil impulse of 120-ton force. But the tracks stayed on the ground. The second of the shell's flight seemed like an eternity. And then, physics came into its own. On the spot of the German tank, a black-orange ball of an explosion swelled. The roar of the impact reached the observers with a delay. When the smoke cleared, the binoculars lowered by themselves. On the faces of the military men froze an expression in which disbelief mixed with superstitious horror. There was no turret on the German tank. It wasn't penetrated. It wasn't burned. It was simply not in its place. The 48-kilogram shell, possessing the kinetic energy of a speeding freight train, hit the joint between the turret and the hull. The explosion of 6 kilograms of TNT, multiplied by the monstrous mass of the slug, created an impulse of such force that the alloyed bolts of the turret ring were sheared off like matchsticks. The multi-ton turret was torn from its seat and hurled 10 meters to the side. It lay in the snow, upside down, looking like the severed head of a giant insect. The commission walked silently to the target. Snow crunched under felt boots. No one was in a hurry to speak. Everyone wanted to see this up close. The picture of destruction was mesmerizing in its brutality. The frontal armor of the hull, which was considered impenetrable, had no through holes, but it was split. A huge crack snaked across the entire plate. The weld seams had burst from the dynamic shock. The side plates were bowed outward. Chaos reigned inside the tank. The transmission was torn from its mounts, the engine had shifted, observation devices had flown out of their sockets. Chief Designer Cotin walked up to the mangled carcass. He ran his hand along the torn edge of the metal where the turret used to be attached. The metal was still warm. "That is not a penetration," said the artilleryman standing nearby quietly. He took off his hat and wiped sweat from his forehead, despite the frost. "That is a concussion of the entire structure. If there had been a crew inside," the colonel interrupted him, "they wouldn't have to be buried. They would have to be washed out with a hose. Their lungs and eyes would have burst from the pressure drop inside the hull, even without armor penetration." It was a moment of truth. The argument between armor and shell ended with the complete and unconditional victory of the shell. It became clear. It is not necessary to drill a hole in the armor to destroy a tank. It is enough to hit it with such force that the mechanisms turn into scrap metal and the people into biological mass. The engineer major, the same one who a month ago reported on the powerlessness of the 45s, looked at the torn-off turret with grim satisfaction. "Beast Slayer," he uttered the first thing that came to mind. A real beast slayer. The word hung in the frosty air. It was not an official index, but it stuck to the machine instantly and forever. There was essence in this word. Not a tank destroyer, not a self-propelled mount. A hunter of large predators. One who goes after a bear with a spear, only instead of a spear, here was a barrel of 152mm caliber. The return to the self-propelled gun was different. The skepticism had vanished. The military looked at the clumsy casemate no longer as a coffin, but as salvation. The machine's shortcomings, low rate of fire, small ammunition load, blindness, receded into the background. The main thing was that it could kill. Kill outright. Right there on the proving ground, on the hood of a Willis, the State Acceptance Act was signed. The wording was dry. Recommend for immediate adoption into service. No, refine, eliminate defects. There was no time for polishing. The factory received an order to drive production. "How many shells can you fit in the ammo rack?" asked the chairman of the commission. 20, answered the designer. "That's few, but each one is lethal. It doesn't need to take 10 shots. It needs one." In the evening, work boiled in the shop again. But the mood had changed. The fatigue hadn't gone anywhere. Backs ached just as unbearably. But a wicked excitement appeared in the people's eyes. They were no longer making an incomprehensible hybrid. They were forging a sword of retribution. The news that the object blew the turret off a German with one shot flew around the factory faster than lightning. Turners, millers, welders, everyone understood that their sleepless nights had found meaning in kilograms of TNT and steel. But the proving ground is sterile conditions. Here the target does not shoot back. Here there is no mud, minefields, or diving Junkers. Here there is no fear of death that paralyzes the will. The machine had to pass the real exam, not before a commission, but before the face of death itself. The first regiments of self-propelled artillery began to form in a rush. Crews were recruited from experienced tankers and artillerymen, but even they were lost when they got inside this steel box. The huge breach pressed psychologically. The casings weighed so much that after the 10th shot, hands began to shake. But anyone who saw the consequences of a hit by a 152mm suitcase was imbued with grim respect for the machine. Winter was ending. The snow turned black, turning into the sticky, impassable mud of the thaw. And in the west, in the area of the Kursk salient, the clouds of the coming battle were already gathering. The most terrible battle of motors in human history. New machines went there, into the inferno, by the trainload. They rode to meet their fate, clanking tracks on platforms, covered with canvas under which the predatory outlines of muzzle brakes could be guessed. The war was moving into a new phase, a phase of heavy arguments. The July sun of 1943 melted the steppe. The air over the Kursk bulge shimmered, distorting the outlines of the horizon. But the real heat wasn't outside. The real heat was inside, the steel boxes buried in the tree lines up to their turrets in the ground. Inside the casemate of the Su-152, the temperature rose to 40 degrees. There was no ventilation. 5 crew members sat in the semi-darkness, dripping with sweat that stung their eyes, mixing with an oily film and dust. They waited. This waiting was more terrible than the battle itself. In battle, adrenaline works. The body moves on reflexes. Fear is displaced by action. Here, time stretched into a viscous, sticky substance. Silence pressed on the ears. Only the heavy breathing of the loader and the annoying buzzing of a fly beating against the periscope could be heard. The position of the self-propelled gun is its life and its grave. The Beast Slayer had one fatal flaw, which every crew member knew. It did not have a rotating turret. It was not a T-34 that could turn its head 360 degrees, searching for a target. The Su-152 looked at the world through a narrow sector of fire. 12 degrees to the left, 12 to the right. That was it. To shoot at a target that appeared from the side, the entire machine had to be turned. And that is 45 tons of iron. The driver had to yank the levers, forcing the tracks to grind the soil. Any movement is demasking. Clouds of dust, the clank of tracks, the trembling of camouflage bushes. For a German observer, this is equivalent to a signal flare. I am here, kill me. Therefore, they stood motionless, as if they had grown into the ground, turning into a pillbox. Ivan, don't sleep, the commander's hoarse whisper broke the silence of the intercom. Not sleeping, comrade lieutenant. My eyes sting, responded the gunner, not looking away from the panoramic sight. The heat haze is drifting. It's hard to gauge distance. They were covered with branches, covered with camouflage nets, so that even from 10 paces the predatory profile of the self-propelled gun blended with the bushes. The gun barrel was wrapped in burlap, so it wouldn't shine in the sun. They were hunters, sitting in ambush for the most dangerous beast in the world. But everyone understood, if the beast noticed them first, the hunter would instantly become the prey. The side armor of the beast slayer was only 60 millimeters. For a tiger, this is cardboard. One shot to the side, and the detonation of the ammo rack would blow the machine to atoms. The crew listened to the ground. Experienced tankers know. First you hear the vibration with the soles of your boots, then your ears catch a low hum, and only then do you see the dust. The hum grew. It was not the even rumble of Soviet diesels, it was the intermittent barking sound of gasoline Maybachs. German engines worked on a different frequency, higher and more nervous. The ground began to tremble slightly. The vibration was transmitted to the hull, resonating in their teeth. "They're coming," the loader said shortly, clutching the casing like a child. His knuckles turned white. "I see dust," the commander's voice became dry and hard. "Landmark 2, dry birch. Distance 1.5 kilometers. In the narrow field of view of the site, gray dots appeared. They grew, turning into angular boxes. There were many of them. The German tank armada crawled across the steppe like a black avalanche, confident in its invulnerability. Heavy tanks went in front. Tigers. They moved brazenly, not hiding, knowing that Russian 76mm guns were not scary to them. Behind them trailed medium tanks and armored personnel carriers with infantry. Inside the casemate of the self-propelled gun hung tension of such density that it could be cut with a knife. Fear disappeared. Only cold, angry calculation remained. The gunner's hands turned the hand wheels smoothly, without jerks, choosing the lead. The driver gripped the levers, ready to turn the hull even a millimeter on command. "Armor piercing," commanded the lieutenant. "Armor piercing in the chamber," the loader echoed. "Don't shoot. Wait. Let them come closer." These were the most terrible meters of the war, to let the enemy within distance of a sure shot. 800 meters. 700. 600. The Germans came on, swaying their long barrels, searching for victims. They did not see the Soviet self-propelled guns camouflaged in the tree line. They thought that before them lay only infantry in trenches, which could simply be crushed by tracks. If you shoot early, the shell might ricochet, and the flash will give away the position. Then the entire armada will turn their turrets in their direction, and in a second, hundreds of shells will blanket this square. You have to hit for sure. Left half a figure. Distance 500. 500 set. Target in crosshairs. Showing his side, the bastard. Steady. "Driver, lock the clutches, so she doesn't budge." In the casemate, it smelled of heated metal, oil, and sour sweat. Someone prayed silently, someone cursed, but aloud only numbers and commands sounded. Hearts beat in the rhythm of the strokes of the German engine pistons. 400 meters, whispered the gunner. I see his rivets. The huge tiger crawled into the crosshairs of the sight. It was majestic and terrifying. Its turret slowly turned, scanning the bushes. The muzzle brake of the German gun looked like a black pupil straight at them. It seemed the German commander would see the glint of optics right now, shout a command, and everything would end. But the German tank turned its barrel away. He didn't notice. He lost this duel before the first shot because he allowed himself to be tracked. "Fire!" barked the commander, and this word became the trigger for releasing monstrous energy. The gunner's finger pressed the electric trigger. Inside the cramped box, thunder crashed. Ears were blocked even through the headsets. The gun breech flew back with a clang, barely missing the loader with the guardrail, and smoothly rolled forward. The casemate was instantly filled with acrid white smoke of powder gases. The exhaust fan turned on, but it couldn't cope. There was nothing to breathe. "Shot!" shouted the loader, already grabbing the next shell. But no one was listening. Everyone looked into the periscopes and sight. There, where a second ago a steel monster had crawled arrogantly, a firestorm now raged. The camouflage was blown off. Branches flew apart from the muzzle blast. Now they were open. Now it was not a hunt, but a brawl. A cruel, dirty brawl where the argument was caliber and the price was life. And the first argument had already been presented, turning the German crew into a handful of ash. Hell was beginning. The first shot blew the camouflage. Now the bushes that hid the steel carcass of the self-propelled gun were just charred sticks sticking out of the plowed earth. Major Senkovsky's Su-152 remained naked before the advancing avalanche. At that moment, the crew ceased to be people and turned into an appendage of the mechanism. Nerves burned out, only motor skills remained, hammered in during training until bloody calluses formed. The loader, choking on the acrid smoke that the fan did not have time to extract, was already dragging the next shell. 48 kilograms of death. His back cracked, muscles cramped, but stopping was impossible. A second of delay cost a life. He drove the shell into the breech with a dull thud, followed by the casing with the charge. "Ready!" The shout drowned in the roar of battle, but the commander understood him by the vibration of the floor. In the major's sight, new targets floated. These were not tigers. This was something even more terrible and incomprehensible. Huge, tall casemates, sloped armor plates, long barrels resembling telegraph poles. Ferdinands. Self-propelled guns created by Ferdinand Porsche specifically to dominate the battlefield. 200 millimeters of frontal armor. 200. Not a single tank gun in the world, neither Soviet nor Allied, could penetrate this shield even at point-blank range. German crews inside these monsters felt like they were in a bank vault. They drove to kill without fear of being killed. They believed in the invulnerability of Krupp steel. But physics is indifferent to faith. Physics knows only mass and speed. "Target! The barn on tracks!" The gunner's voice trembled with tension. "Distance 800. Armor piercing. Hit the casemate!" commanded Senkovsky. The distance was closing. The German self-propelled guns came on confidently, slowly, masterfully. They had not yet realized that the rules of the game had changed. They were looking for T-34s to shoot like in a gallery. They did not see the Soviet beast masked in smoke, which had already aimed its 152mm argument at the lead vehicle. Shot. Again that monstrous blow, from which it seemed eyeballs would burst. The entire self-propelled gun shuddered, rolling back half a meter. The casing flew out of the breech with a clang, burning the loader's legs. The heavy, armor-piercing slugs stitched the air and hit the frontal plate of the Ferdinand. It was not a neat hole, like sub-caliber shells leave. It was the strike of Thor's hammer. The kinetic energy of the shell, flying at the speed of sound, instantly converted into thermal and mechanical energy. 200 millimeters of steel held. The shell did not go through. It flattened, leaving a monstrous dent looking like a volcano crater. But what happened inside the German machine was more terrible than any penetration. The law of conservation of momentum worked flawlessly. The energy of the impact passed through the armor as a shock wave. On the inner side of the armor plate, right in front of the faces of the German crew, the metal could not withstand the stress. It delaminated. Shards of their own armor, sharp as razors and hot as irons, sprayed inside the fighting compartment with the speed of a bullet. This is called the spalling effect. From the outside, the machine looks whole. Inside, a meat grinder. The driver of the Ferdinand died instantly. His chest turned into a sieve from shards of his own hatch. The gunner, pressed against the sight, received a blow of such force that the optical instrument entered his eye socket. The rest of the crew were concussed by the pressure drop. The shock wave in the closed volume of the casemate works like a hydraulic press. Eardrums burst, blood gushes from noses and ears. The brain turns into jelly, incapable of giving commands to the body. The German self-propelled gun, this masterpiece of technical thought, instantly turned into a steel coffin, filled with groans and the smell of blood. It jerked and froze, continuing to look threateningly forward with its barrel. But inside, there was no longer anyone who could pull the trigger. "Hit!" screamed the gunner, seeing black, greasy smoke pouring from the hatches of the Ferdinand. "It's burning, the bastard!" On the German side, the radio waves exploded with panic. Confident, crisp German language was replaced by hysterical barking. "Achtung! Achtung! The Russians have heavy artillery in the first line! They are firing direct fire! These aren't tanks! The armor isn't holding! Hans is killed! We are pulling back!" The myth of invulnerability collapsed in 1 second. German commanders, who just this morning laughed at the Russian Ivans, now looked into periscopes with horror. They saw their best, most protected machines stopping, one after another, crippled by an unknown force. The shells of the Su-152 didn't just penetrate, or not penetrate. They broke. On a neighboring Ferdinand, the impact of a high-explosive shell tore the engine from its mounts. The multi-ton motor broke loose and crushed the transmission, immobilizing the machine. On another, the blow knocked off a track along with the drive sprocket and a piece of side armor, mangling the suspension so that it was beyond repair. Inside the Soviet self-propelled gun reigned the hell of physical labor. The loader no longer felt his hands. His tunic stuck to his body, dark with sweat. He worked like a robot. Grab the shell, lift, ram. Grab the casing, ram. Close the breech. Fragmentary! Fragmentary up! Major Sankovsky did not let the enemy recover. He understood. While the Germans are in shock, while they are backing up, trying to understand what is happening, they must be finished off. The psychology of the enemy had cracked. Animal fear of an unknown force capable of cracking a Ferdinand like a nut paralyzed the will of the German gunners. Their hands shook. They missed. Shells fell short or ricocheted off the beast slayer's thick gun mantlet, and the Soviet crew entered the rhythm of death. Shot, reload, shot, reload. In the casemate, there was a roar from which blood flowed from the noses of all five, but they didn't notice it. They saw only how the German beasts burned. "Take that, scum! For Stalingrad! For Leningrad!" wheezed the gunner, sending another shell. The 48-kilogram slug hit the side of a turning Tiger. The explosion of the ammo rack was of such force that the turret of the German tank was thrown into the air to the height of a 3-story house. Spinning, it fell next to the hull, stabbing into the ground with its barrel like a grave cross. The battle near Kursk turned into a slaughter. The technical superiority of the Wehrmacht was ground down by the crude, merciless force of the Soviet caliber. Sankovsky's crew destroyed 10 enemy tanks and self-propelled guns in that battle. 10 steel monsters turned into piles of scrap metal. But heroism here was not in beautiful poses. Heroism was in the fingers of the loader, worn down to the bone, in the red eyes of the gunner, in the hoarse voice of the commander, and in that inhuman resilience of the metal, which withstood overloads incompatible with life. When the battle died down and the smoke began to clear, black torches remained smoking on the field. The German attack had choked. The Beast Slayer stood in the middle of this graveyard of machinery, sooty, dirty, with peeled paint, but alive. The hatch opened, and the loader climbed out onto the armor. He greedily gulped the air, smelling of burning and death. His hands shook, not from fear, but because his muscles were clogged with lactic acid to the limit. He looked at the smoking skeleton of the Ferdinand 500 meters ahead and spat blood. "Tough bastards," he wheezed. "But we are tougher." It was a baptism by fire, the day when the Panzerwaffe realized their time of impunity was over. A predator had entered the battlefield who didn't give a damn about the thickness of their armor. A predator who spoke the language of ultimatums of 152 caliber. And the Germans had nothing to object to this argument. July 12, 1943, Prokhorovka Station. On this day, war ceased to be an art of maneuver and turned into a meat grinder. On a narrow sector of the front, compressed by the Psel River and a railway embankment, 2 steel avalanches collided. The density of fire and metal per square kilometer exceeded all conceivable limits. The earth hummed so that people shouted but did not hear their own voices. In this hell, the crews of the Su-152 received the task for which they were created: to become breakwaters against which the German armored storm must shatter. The Germans came in the classic Panzerkeil, the armored wedge. Heavy Tigers in front, Panthers and medium T4s behind them. This formation was a hammer that for years had smashed through any defense from Poland to France. They came confident that before them were again light tanks and infantry that could be crushed by tracks. But in the tree lines on the flanks, 12 self-propelled guns of the heavy regiment were waiting for them. 12 barrels of caliber 152 millimeters looked into the side of the German wedge. When the first volleys tore the dusty veil, the orderliness of the German offensive vanished. This was not a battle, this was a beating. A heavy, high-explosive fragmentation shell, hitting the running gear of a Tiger, didn't just knock off a track. The blast wave and the mass of metal tore out drive wheels with the meat, broke road wheels, and tore final drives. A 60-ton machine, losing momentum at full gallop, turned sideways by inertia, exposing vulnerable armor to the next blow. Inside the self-propelled guns, men worked at the limit of physiology. The most terrible load fell on the loaders. In the cramped, gas-filled casemate, where the temperature exceeded 50 degrees, they performed a feat not written about in award citations. Shell, 48 kilograms. Charge in the casing, another 15. Separate loading. That means 2 movements for every shot. Bend down to the rack on the floor, lift the cast iron death, turn around without hitting the breech, ram. Then repeat the same with the casing. Rate of fire, 2 shots per minute. 3. If the loader decides to die of a heart attack, but complete the task. Come on, brother, wheezed the commander, seeing through the periscope how the German tanks were trying to regroup. The loader did not answer. He had no strength for words. Sweat flooded his eyes, corroding the mucous membrane to blindness. His back turned into a solid knot of pain. Fingers were skinned to blood on the breech. Every lift of a shell was accompanied by a sound like the growl of a beast. But the breech clanked, and the gun spat fire again. The effect of the hits was monstrous. German tankers, accustomed to their Tigers withstanding dozens of hits from 76mm guns, faced the physics of extreme energies. Radio intercepts from that day preserved voices full of animal horror. Attention all! Russians are using super heavy calibers. 812 is destroyed. Its turret was blown off. Pull back! Armor isn't holding. They are hitting through us. It was a psychological breaking point. When a Tiger crew sees the turret of a machine running next to them, weighing 8 tons, get blown off by a single hit and thrown onto a neighboring tank, confidence in victory is replaced by panic. The German wedge crumbled. Tanks began to back up, colliding with each other, creating ideal targets. The Su-152s worked like a blacksmith's hammer on a red-hot workpiece. One of the shells hit the forehead of an attacking Panther. The armor-piercing slug smashed through the upper armor plate, passed through the entire fighting compartment, tore out the engine, and punched out the rear plate. The tank was simply gutted from the inside. Not even fragments for identification remained of the crew. Smoke from burning German machines covered the field near Prokhorovka with a black carpet. The sun disappeared. In the twilight of soot, the flashes of the Beast Slayer's shots looked like lightning strikes. But power had its price. The ammunition was melting away. 20 shots. This is negligibly small for a prolonged battle. "Fragmentary! Last one!" shouted the loader, wiping bloody foam from his lips. "Target! The lead one! Hit under the track edge!" The last shell went to the target. The explosion raised a column of earth and metal. The German tank dipped its nose and froze. When the ammunition ran out, the self-propelled guns did not leave. They remained in positions, continuing to scare the enemy with their silhouettes. The Germans, demoralized by losses, were afraid to approach these steel monsters, expecting a new blow. They didn't know that inside the Beast Slayers sat deafened, half-dead from fatigue men who had not a single shell left, only TT pistols and grenades. By evening, it became clear. The backbone of the Panzerwaffe was cracked. Not broken completely, but cracked. At Prokhorovka, the Germans lost not only hundreds of tanks, they lost the status of invincibles. They realized that for their technological perfection, for their optics, radio communications, and ergonomics, the Russians had found a crude but absolute answer. The Su-152 became the symbol of this answer. An ugly, rough, cramped machine made in 24 days at the limit of strength proved that the mass of the shell is more important than the comfort of the crew. On that day on the field near Prokhorovka, a new truth was born. There is no armor that cannot be broken if you hit it hard enough. Crews climbed out of the machines only at night. They fell onto the grass next to the tracks and fell asleep instantly, unable even to eat. Their faces were black with soot. Their hands shook so much that it was impossible to light a cigarette. The loaders lay on their backs, arms spread wide, their spines aching with dull, exhausting pain. They had done their job. They had thrown tons of iron to stop a steel avalanche. And a few kilometers away from them, in German headquarters, gloom reigned. Reports from SS Tank Division commanders read like obituaries. Losses are catastrophic. Russian self-propelled guns penetrate any projection. Morale of crews is undermined. The beast was wounded. And this wound was inflicted by a heavy, blunt sledgehammer of 152 millimeter caliber. Hunter and victim had swapped places. Now tigers feared every bush, every shadow behind which a squat silhouette with a huge muzzle brake could be hiding. The war rolled to the west, driven by heavy blows of Soviet artillery. Germans learn quickly. This is an axiom of war. The shock from the first meetings with the beast slayers passed, replaced by cold, calculating malice. The Panzerwaffe realized, going into a frontal attack against 152 millimeter barrels is suicide. The heavy tigers became more cautious, and a new, more dangerous predator came onto the stage. The Panther. Autumn 1943. Left Bank, Ukraine. Here in the tall grass and ravines, the war turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Panther was faster than the Tiger. Its 75 millimeter gun with a huge muzzle velocity stitched armor like paper, and the sloped hull plates gave it a chance to survive a return hit from a medium caliber. But most importantly, it was maneuverable. For the crew of the Su-152, this became a problem. The self-propelled gun, created as a battering ram, turned out to be too clumsy for a duel with a fast opponent. It had no turret. To aim the gun at a target that had shifted 20 degrees, the entire hull had to be turned. On the viscous black soil, the 45-ton machine turned heavily, straining the clutches. While the driver yanked the levers, trying to catch the Panther in the sight, the German had time to fire 2 shots. The tactic of brute force stopped working. Cunning was needed. The geometry of death. Right 30! Movement in the bushes, the commander's shout in the intercom hit the ears. Can't see, snapped the gunner, spinning the horizontal aiming wheel to the stop. The sector of fire ended. Further was a blind zone. Driver, pivot right, hard! The engine roared, spewing clouds of blue smoke. The tracks bit into the ground, scattering clods of mud. The hull of the self-propelled gun jerked, slowly, agonizingly slowly turning after the elusive shadow. The German Panther leaped out of the tree line, flashing its spotted camouflage. It went in an arc, trying to flank them. Its long barrel was already searching for a vulnerable spot on the casemate of the Soviet machine. The situation was a stalemate. The beast slayer didn't have time to turn the gun. Another second, and the German sub-caliber shell would stitch through the side, where behind thin armor lay fuel tanks and powder charges. "Can't make it!" screamed the driver. "The ground is slipping! Hit in front of it!" The decision came instantly, dictated not by the manual, but by animal instinct. High explosive, into the ground, under the track. It was the only possibility. To shoot not at the tank, but under the tank. The gunner didn't bother looking for vulnerable points on the armor. He lowered the barrel below the waterline of the German machine. The crosshairs lay on the grass 10 meters in front of the nose of the rushing Panther. Shot. The heavy, high-explosive shell 530 hit the ground. The fuse was set to high-explosive action with a slight delay. The slug buried itself in the soil and detonated exactly at the moment when the Panther drove over that spot with its belly. The physics of an explosion in a confined space between the ground and the belly of a tank works more terribly than a direct hit. The blast wave, reflecting off the soil, hit upward with the force of a hydraulic press. The belly of the tank is the thinnest place, only 16 millimeters of steel. Tons of TNT equivalent simply bent the belly inward. The suspension torsion bars snapped like dry pasta. Road wheels flew apart. Inside the tank, the floor heaved up, breaking the legs of the driver and the radio operator. The gearbox was torn from its mounts and driven into the engine. The Panther jumped as if stung and collapsed onto its belly, enveloped in dust and smoke. It didn't burn, but it was dead. The crew inside received severe concussions and fractures. The machine froze, turning from a graceful predator into a pile of useless iron. "Done," exhaled the gunner, wiping sweat with his sleeve. "Jumped your last jump, kiddie." In the casemate, there was a smell of cordite and burnt clutch. Hands were shaking. This was not shooting at tigers marching in formation like in a gallery. This was a knife fight in a dark room. Here, fractions of a second and the ability to use any chance decided everything. A ricochet off the ground, a shockwave strike, shooting to scare. The crews of the Su-152 learned to fight not by manuals, but by intuition. But the main enemy of the self-propelled gun remained its blindness. Through the narrow slits of the periscopes, you can't see a grenadier in a ditch or an anti-tank gun in the bushes. A lone beast slayer in the field is a corpse. It needs eyes. And these eyes became the infantry. Interaction with the paratroopers was built on a simple, crude barter. The self-propelled gun provides armor and power. The infantry provides vision and protection from Panzerfaust men. On the rear of the machine, behind the casemate, a squad of submachine gunners always sat. They were tied to this block of steel by an invisible umbilical cord of survival. "Hey, on the armor!" The commander leaned out of the hatch during a short respite. "What's beyond the ravine?" The sergeant infantryman, all in dust, with a bandaged head, jumped down to the ground. "Pillbox there, comrade captain. Concrete. The machine gun won't let us lift our heads, and they have a gun, caliber 75. They have the road sighted. Point with your finger. That hill over there. The embrasure is low, covered by grass." The commander ducked back into the casemate. Landmark, the hill. High explosive, fuse on delayed. We're going to pick some concrete. Now the self-propelled gun worked like a sniper rifle of elephant caliber. It didn't climb forward. It stood in cover while the infantry drew fire on themselves, revealing firing points. As soon as the German gun gave itself away with a flash, a 48-kilogram argument arrived there. One shell. The explosion lifted cubic meters of earth into the air along with the log roofing and chunks of concrete. The pillbox simply ceased to exist. In its place remained a smoking crater filled with concrete crumbs and dust. The infantry rose to attack, hiding behind the wide hull of the self-propelled gun, like behind a stone wall. Dialogues inside the machine became shorter, angrier. Arguments about the choice of position arose instantly and died out just as quickly. There was no democracy here. There was the dictate of survival. "Don't go there, Commander. It's a swamp. We'll get stuck," yelled the driver, seeing where the lieutenant was pointing. "That's the position. From there, the whole flank is in the palm of your hand." "We'll get stuck, I say. I won't carry this beast out on my hands. Execute!" "If we get stuck, the infantry will push us out. We need to close this sector, otherwise the battalion will be slaughtered." And the driver drove the machine into the mud, cursing through his teeth, feeling the tracks kneading the slurry, feeling the multi-ton carcass starting to slide. But he brought it to the position because he knew. His skill was the only thing separating the 5 crew members from a mass grave. Hunting fast predators taught Soviet tankers the main thing. Strength is not in the thickness of the forehead, but in the ability to impose your rules. If you are slow, make the enemy stop. If you are blind, find someone who will look for you. If the enemy's armor cannot be pierced, hit where there is no armor. The Su-152 ceased to be just a self-propelled howitzer. It became the center of the battle formation around which the entire breakthrough tactic was built. By the end of 1943, German tankers had learned the lesson. If you see an Su-152, Do not try to play a nightly duel with it. Either call in aviation or run. Because this Russian hammer strikes rarely, but if it hits, there is nothing left to repair. And no one. And the Russians learned to hit not only the front, but also off the ground, off walls, using every bump as an ally. Brute force, multiplied by soldiers' ingenuity, became the most terrible weapon of this war. War in the field is geometry. War in the city is claustrophobia. When Soviet troops entered the ruins of Kharkov and Kiev, the rules of survival changed instantly. Spacious steppes, where a 152mm gun could dictate its will at a distance of 1.5 kilometers, were replaced by narrow stone sacks. Here the battle distance shrank to a grenade throw. Here the most terrible predator of the fields turned into a blind elephant trapped in a china shop. For the crew of the Su-152, the city became hell. The huge dimensions of the machine, which in the steppe were hidden by bushes, could not be hidden here. The self-propelled gun took up the whole street. The long barrel protruding forward by meters became a curse. On narrow streets, the driver went crazy. Any turn turned into a complex engineering operation. The gun caught on corners of houses, knocked down lampposts, poked into piles of broken brick. "Barrel! Watch the barrel, damn it!" shouted the commander when the muzzle brake screeched along the brickwork. "Pack it with dirt and it'll burst when fired." But more terrible than the crampedness was the vulnerability. In the city, there is no front line. Death looks from every basement window, from every attic, from every sewer grate. And this death had a new name: Panzerfaust. A small tube stuffed with a shaped charge. Cheap stamping given into the hands of any Volkssturm member. But this tube burned through 200mm of armor. For the Su-152, with its 60mm of side armor, a hit by a Faustman meant instant death. The cumulative jet, burning through metal, burst inside the casemate with a temperature of 1,000 degrees, igniting fuel tanks and ammunition. The crew burned alive, without even realizing where the blow came from.
"Infantry, don't sleep! Watch the windows, upper floors!"
The commander's voice broke into a wheeze. The self-propelled gun crawled along the street, littered with debris like a cornered beast. Hatches battened down. Visibility through the periscopes, 0. Dust from destroyed buildings hung in the air as a dense curtain, plastering the optics. The commander saw only a narrow sector right in front of him. What was happening to the side, behind, above, he did not know. He could only pray for the paratroopers walking alongside the machine. These dirty, grey figures with submachine guns were the eyes and ears of the blind giant. They combed the ruins, threw grenades into basements, picked off German grenadiers from roofs. Without infantry, a self-propelled gun in the city lived exactly 5 minutes. "Right, 3rd floor, machine gun!" A paratrooper drummed on the armor with a rifle butt. Inside the casemate, this sound was an alarm signal. "Where? Can't see." The gunner feverishly turned the hand wheels. The barrel slowly crawled up, but hit the limiter. Elevation angle, only 20 degrees. The gun couldn't reach the upper floors. The physics of the design worked against them. "Can't reach. He's sitting high. Hit the foundation. Fold this house to hell." It was the only solution. If you can't kill the sniper or machine gunner precisely, you must destroy his cover entirely. The loader rammed a high-explosive grenade into the breach. The weight of the shell in the city felt different. Here it was not just a slug, but concentrated hatred for these stone walls behind which the enemy hid. "Fire!" The shot in the narrow stone corridor of the street was monstrous. The sound wave, reflecting off the walls of the houses, hit the ears so that blood ran from noses. Windows in neighboring buildings flew out along with the frames. The shell hit the pier between the windows of the second floor. The explosion of 48 kilograms of steel and explosives in the confined volume of the building produced the effect of an earthquake. The facade of the house simply settled. The brickwork turned into dust. The floors collapsed, burying the machine gun nest, snipers, and Panzerfaust men. A huge cloud of red brick dust covered the street, hiding the self-propelled gun. "Got it," exhaled the gunner. In the eyepiece of the sight, there was only a murky veil. But there was no time to rejoice. From an alley on the left, an angular shadow jumped out. A German Stug self-propelled gun. Low, invisible in the ruins, it waited for its hour. Distance, 50 meters. Point-blank shot. The slug hit the gun mantlet of the Soviet machine. Ricochet. Sparks sprayed like a fountain. The blow was of such force that the gunner's sight was knocked out of alignment and the scale illumination bulbs burst. Inside the casemate, the light went out. Darkness, the smell of burnt insulation, and ringing in the ears. "Driver, ram him!" screamed the commander. No time to load. No time to turn the gun, either. The 45-ton monster surged forward. The engine howled at maximum revs. It was an act of desperation and rage. The beast slayer hit the German self-propelled gun head-on. The screech of crumpling metal drowned out the sounds of gunfire. The German machine, lighter, flew back, ramming its stern into the wall of a house. The Su-152 pressed on top of it, crushing the casemate with its mass, pressing it into the cobblestones with its tracks. "Back! Back up!" When the Soviet self-propelled gun crawled away, the German machine was a shapeless pile of iron. The crew inside was crushed. This was not an artillery duel. This was a street fight, where fists, teeth, and body weight were used. Urban battles exhausted people faster than field marches. Here, nerves were taut as strings around the clock. There was no rest. They slept in turns, right on the ammo rack, without taking off their headsets. They ate dry rations sitting on the breech, with dirty hands smelling of gunpowder and blood. Any sound outside, the rustle of falling plaster, the clinking of a casing, made them flinch and grab their weapons. Here, in the stone labyrinths, the crews understood the price of their power. The 152mm caliber was excessive for tanks, but ideal for war with architecture. The Beast Slayer's shell didn't look for an embrasure. It simply made a passage where there wasn't one. If the infantry couldn't go through the door, the self-propelled gun made a new door, 3 meters wide. Kiev and Kharkov lay in ruins, but these ruins were cleared of the enemy methodically and brutally. The self-propelled guns went through cities like icebreakers through pack ice, leaving behind lanes of broken brick and crushed German resistance. They proved that even in tight spaces, in conditions for which they were not created, brute force and determination can break the back of any defense. But the price of this experience was measured in hundreds of burned machines, left as black monuments at the intersections of foreign cities. War taught cruelly, if you are big and clumsy, you must be so terrifying that the enemy dies at the mere thought of shooting at you. And the Su-152 learned this lesson perfectly. 1944 changed the geometry of the war. The vector of force turned to the west. Now the Red Army was not backing away, snapping back, but moving forward, grinding the Wehrmacht with its tracks. But attacking is scarier than defending. The Germans, masters of fortification, dug into the ground. They built lines of defense poured with concrete, entangled in barbed wire, and stuffed with mines. Against these fortifications, ordinary tanks were powerless. T-34s burned without reaching the trenches, shot up from invisible embrasures. Here, on the banks of the Dnieper, and under the leaden sky of Leningrad, the Su-152 changed its profession. From a tank hunter, it turned into an assault gun, into a battering ram that had to punch holes in concrete walls. Winter near Leningrad, the lifting of the blockade. Terrain, a solid, fortified area. Pillboxes stood so densely that the crossfire of machine guns did not let the infantry lift their heads. The snow was gray with lead. Attacks choked one after another. Infantry commanders, hoarse from shouting and powerlessness, looked back to the rear, waiting for the only salvation. And it appeared. The heavy, self-propelled gun crawled out for direct fire, slowly, like inevitable doom. Its engine roared at low revs, spitting black smoke. The tracks broke the ice and frozen ground. It wasn't going to hide. It was going to kill concrete. "Commander, give us fire!" An infantry lieutenant in a dirty camouflage suit jumped onto the armor, knocking on the hatch with his rifle butt. "That mound over there, third layer of logs, concrete cap, pinned down a platoon, can't lift heads." The commander of the self-propelled gun leaned out of the hatch for a second. His face was gray with fatigue, eyes inflamed. "I see. Landmark, broken pine, distance 300. "You won't take it! The walls are a meter thick!" Artillery pounded it for half an hour, only knocked off the plaster. "Get off the armor, infantry. It's going to be loud now." Inside the casemate, the usual heavy work began. The crew didn't think about heroism. They thought about physics. To destroy a concrete pillbox, an armor-piercing shell is useless. It will just punch through it or get stuck in the wall. A high explosive is needed. High explosive fragmentation grenade 54R. 48 kilograms, of which 6 kilograms is cast TNT. Fragmentary. Fuse on high explosive. The command was short. The loader, grunting, rammed the shell. The cap from the fuse was unscrewed. This means the shell will explode not on contact, but after digging into the obstacle. It will enter the concrete like a drill and tear it apart from the inside. The gunner brought the crosshairs under the embrasure of the pillbox, to where the light of the German machine gun flashed. "Ready! Fire!" A shot from an Su-152 at a concrete fortification is a sight impossible to forget. It is not just an explosion. It is the annihilation of matter. The heavy slug hit the concrete monolith. For a split second it seemed nothing happened. And then the pillbox simply disappeared. The explosion from inside blew out the concrete box. The roof, weighing several tons, flew into the air, tumbling like cardboard. The walls folded outward. Rebar, thick as a finger, snapped with a screech that drowned out the roar of the explosion. On the site of the fortified firing point remained only a smoking crater filled with concrete crumbs and dust. The German machine gun crew ceased to exist not as a combat unit, but as a biological object. "Hit!" The gunner didn't even smile. It was just work. Dirty, hard work. "Next! Left 10! Earth and timber pillbox!" The self-propelled gun worked like a giant sapper. Only instead of wire cutters and a probe, it had a caliber of 152 millimeters. It gnawed through the enemy's defense, destroying strong points one by one. The infantry rose to attack immediately after the explosion, while the dust still hung in the air, while the Germans in neighboring trenches were stunned and demoralized by the power of the Russian weapon. In 1944, tactics changed completely. Now the beast slayers did not stand in ambushes. They moved in the battle formations of advancing tanks. IS-2s and T-34s went ahead, and the Su-152s moved behind them, looking for targets that were too tough for ordinary guns. If the tanks ran into a blockage, a stone house turned into a fortress, or a tiger buried in the ground, they parted. The self-propelled gun came forward. "Let the mistress through," tankers shouted into the radio. She came out, fired one shot, and the problem disappeared. The house turned into a pile of bricks. The blockage flew into splinters. The buried tank became a grave. After that, the self-propelled gun crawled back, making way for fast and maneuverable machines. This was the crushing battering ram of the offensive. The machine, created out of desperation in 43, by 44 had become a symbol of unstoppable force. But this force came at a high price. The service life of the running gear was at the limit. Engines, designed for less weight, boiled. The transmission howled, grinding gears. Drivers performed miracles keeping these old, worn-out machines running. At halts, they didn't sleep, but lay under the belly, tightening torsion bars, changing track links, pouring oil by the bucket into the voracious diesels. "Just a little more, darling. Another 100 kilometers," whispered the mechanic, stroking the hot armor of the side clutch. "We'll make it to Berlin, and you'll rest there." Inside the casemate, there was no longer fear of German equipment. There was only fear of breakdown. To be left without power during an attack meant becoming a target. Therefore, crews cherished their machines more than themselves. Near Vitebsk, near Minsk, on the approaches to Warsaw, the scenario repeated everywhere. The German defense, which seemed impregnable, crumbled to dust when regiments of heavy self-propelled artillery got down to business. The Germans called these strikes Russische Dampfwalze, the Russian steamroller. And it was true. It was a steamroller that slowly but surely crushed everything in its path, rolling the ambitions of the Reich into concrete dust and road mud. The dialogue between infantry and self-propelled gunners became the language of victory. "Thanks, brothers. Clean work," shouted an infantry captain running past a smoking self-propelled gun. "Go on, Queen of the Fields. We opened the passage. The rest is up to you," waved the loader, wiping his face with a rag. They went west, leaving behind destroyed pillboxes and burned Panthers. The barrels of their guns looked toward the enemy's lair, and every shot brought the end of the war 48 kilograms closer. It was no longer just equipment. It was the punishing hand of history, cast in steel and filled with TNT. By 1945, the original ones, those very first Su-152s born in the rush of 43, had almost disappeared. Metal also has a yield strength. Machines created in 24 days as an act of desperation had worked out their resource 3 times over. Their engines, designed for 100 hours of combat, had worked thousands. Their hulls, welded by hand, were covered with a web of fatigue cracks. Torsion bars sagged, unable to withstand the constant overloads from the howitzer recoil. The old warriors died not only from enemy shells, but also from old age, leaving their iron bones on the roadsides from Kursk to the Oder. New predators came to replace them. ISU-152. Externally they were similar, but the essence had changed. The new self-propelled gun was based on the chassis of the heavy IS tank. It was more reliable, stronger, better armored. It had normal ventilation, and the crew no longer lost consciousness from powder gases after the 5th shot. But the soul of the machine remained the same. It was still the ML-20 gun howitzer, the same caliber. The same 48-kilogram argument that accepted no compromises. The nickname Beast Slayer passed to the new machine by inheritance, like a title. The Battle of Berlin became the final chord of this symphony of destruction. Here, in the enemy's lair, the concentration of concrete and stone reached its maximum. The Reichstag, the Chancellery, city blocks turned into fortresses. German Panzerfaust men sat in every basement. The last tigers and king tigers stood buried at intersections, snapping back with the doom of cornered beasts. But the Soviet crews no longer had fear of them. There was only the cold professionalism of the gravediggers of Nazism. Landmark, house with columns, second floor, machine gun point, high explosive, under the window ledge. The dialogue in the casemate sounded mundane. Shot. The wall of the building collapsed, burying the last defenders of the Third Reich. Self-propelled guns went through the streets of Berlin, leaving lanes behind them. They didn't maneuver. They simply demolished obstacles. A barricade of trams and concrete blocks, one high explosive shot, and the way is clear. A sniper in the attic? A shell takes off the roof along with the attic. It was the triumph of brute force over refined evil. The Germans were proud of their optics, their rangefinders, their ergonomics. They created technically flawless machines. But the Russians created a sledgehammer. And when this sledgehammer came down on the head of German technical thought, it turned out that no optics will save you if a piece of steel the weight of a man is flying at you. In the last days of the war, a meeting of generations took place. On one of the streets of Berlin, amidst smoking ruins, a column of brand-new IS-UZ passed the carcass of an old Su-152. It stood by the roadside, missing a track, rusty, with a pierced casemate. A veteran of 43 who miraculously made it to Germany and died a step away from victory. The young crews looked at it with respect. They knew, if not for this homely, hastily made coffin on the KV base, they wouldn't be driving here now. These exact machines broke the back of the Panzerwaffe when there was nothing else to break it with. Victory in May 45 put a period in the argument between armor and shell. The myth of the invulnerability of German weapons was not just dispelled, it was crushed, flattened, and melted down. The fate of the machines themselves was tragic and prosaic. The war ended. The huge army of beast slayers turned out to be unnecessary in peacetime. Their resource was exhausted. They were not suitable for parades, too rough, too scary, too charred. Most of them, having done their job, remained rusting on proving grounds or went to the smelter. The country needed metal to rebuild cities, and the heroes of yesterday turned into rebar for new houses. But the lesson taught by the Su-152 remained in history forever. It is a lesson about the nature of power. When you face an opponent who is technically superior to you, who is protected by armor that seems impenetrable, do not try to play by his rules. Do not try to surpass him in subtlety. Find an asymmetric answer. The Germans bet on impenetrability. Soviet engineers answered with destructibility. You can't punch a hole? We will break the whole structure. You protected the crew with thick steel. We will hit so hard that the crew dies from the shock. The Su-152 is a monument to engineering audacity. It is proof that there are no hopeless situations. When, in January 1943, it seemed that the Tigers were invincible and shells bounced off them, the people in Chelyabinsk did not give up. They didn't start writing reports on the impossibility of the task. They created a monster in 24 days that changed the course of the war. Today, looking at museum exhibits, it is hard to imagine what the people inside these cramped steel boxes felt. The smell of diesel mixed with the smell of blood. The ringing in the ears that didn't go away for weeks. The weight of the shell tearing joints. But it was this heavy, dirty, superhuman labor that became the foundation of victory. War is not a parade of beautiful equipment. War is soot, sweat, and the physics of limit loads. And in this war, The winner was not the one who had prettier blueprints, but the one who could create a weapon capable of solving tasks at any cost. The Beast Slayer has gone into history, but left behind the main knowledge. For any force, there is another force. For any invulnerable armor, there is a caliber. And if the enemy thinks he is safe because his walls are thicker, he is mistaken. The 152mm arguments just haven't been brought up yet, but they will definitely be found. Always.